Some people, they look at the titles, and some people's like me. I'm unpacking the title, and every time I go through all the track listings of any album first to see if anything resonates with me. Here we go with the resonates. Hey. It's like, does it resonate with me? Right? Is it something I'm familiar with? And somebody have to look it up, and what does that mean? And so we got something like Moon Drinker. I was like, that can be interpreted in so many ways, right?
Yeah.
But Pharaohs itself, though, it's a tower of light, right? It's a tower of light, again, fitting with the Lightships, fitting with the idea of reaching and extending into the cosmos, expanding, going beyond the levels of consciousness. I mean, just that's how I interpret it that way. Like, we want to go even deeper. So that's what I think about, again, when I hear titles. So, and I jumped right to Pharaohs, right? I jumped right to that title. So that is your kind of vision for that title of that song, or
so with Pharaohs, it's funny. So this actually it held the same title, but it was a completely different track for a large part of the production cycle of the album. This was the last song that I changed completely. Like, I scrapped the original one and started a new one. Not intentionally. Like, it's not that I disliked the original one. It's just that I was just messing around on this like vibraphone sounds, and it was just so beautiful that like I was just like, this is the new intro track. Like this, so I was playing it out on the keyboard, and like the vibraphone sound that you hear, the key sound that you hear, is completely improvised, like no metronome, right? Because most of the songs are obviously put to a metronome, right? So there's some consistency to the rhythm. That one was completely stream of consciousness. Wow. Like, I was just messing around with this vibraphone patch, and then I played the drums on top of that live. So everything, that's kind of what leads to this whole like kind of organic, kind of disorienting feeling. The title Pharaohs is important because in a lot of like in a lot of situations, paranormal, supernatural, a lot of people revere like flashing lights as a way to like kind of like put yourself in a trance, or some sort of like rhythmic light that puts you in a trance, that like kind of like is a way for you to ascend to a different realm, etc. So I came up with that title because I imagined when I was listening to it as like a strobing light tower that was just meant to help you transition to wherever the album wanted you to go. Like, it was kind of prepping you for the journey. So that's kind of what I was going for with Pharaohs. And it's funny because funny thing about titles is like they're always the very last part of my process, but they're always the first thing that people see, right? So it's they are more important than I think a lot of artists give credit to them for being. So yeah, I love that your mind immediately went to Light Tower, because that was kind of my intention, and I liked the idea of a strobing, not like super fast strobing. Like, I imagine just kind of like a lighthouse would appear in a distance, right? It would just kind of be like momentary like blips. Almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I did is I did listen, and I did record myself with some commentary and transcribed it, because I didn't want to lose it. And I do have something here. It's one of those text-to-speech or one of those like transcripts, and it's not perfect, so I'm going to try to decode it. But I said, and I think that it's like the opening song is so important, right?
Yeah.
It's like someone might just move on,
right?
If they're not feeling it. And I was like, damn, the choice of that opening song, it's like the opening of a film. Like, if it's a couple minutes, I'm like, no, I'm not going to get into this at all.
Yep.
But I said it opened it up for me. I said, I felt like a breeze on a Sunday afternoon. It's just easy. It's easy, and it feels good. When I listen to it, it makes me feel calm for some reason. Certain songs can make you feel calm, and then there it is. And it's like we're just opening it up. Here we go. Welcome. Such a nice transition into Lightships for me. So then we move on. It's like all of a sudden, then now we're moving on to the a groovy broadcast. Of course, a groovy broadcast, which was to me a very it was like upbeat, and it was groovy. Like if I looked up groovy in a musical dictionary, there it was.
Yeah.
So is that obviously was what you were going for there?
Yeah, I obviously, I came up with the track and I was like, yeah, it's groovy, right? And it's funny because it is funny because I just said that the title is like the last thing in my process. This is the rare exception to that. I came up with the very beginning of the song, just an 8-bar pattern. And I called my Logic session, I usually call it like random gibberish just so I can have it. This one I called a groovy broadcast, and then it just stuck to the very end. And I also kind of, wanted it to feel like it was kind of like an introduction into this kind of weird but like kind of familiar setting.
Yeah.
Because I'm very much influenced by Daft Punk, and I feel like this is kind of a little bit of a nod to that influence, and I really wanted it to feel familiar, but at the same time I wanted it to be also have like a little tinge of spookiness to it, like a little bit of spectral paranormality to it.
It's interesting because in reading my notes, because I was like, wow, this is interesting. I put, and then boom, it just builds the layers and layers. It just gets groovier and groovier. It's almost like going from the mundane to the wild and out and insane, It just makes you think of, being at home, dancing in your living room. And I wonder if people do that. They just turn on music and maybe smoke a little weed, maybe have a drink, or maybe none of that. Maybe they just start dancing. They put a groove on. They turn it up a little louder than they usually would. And I found that it was just grooving. And it said, so it is broadcasting in a way, we're not just sitting watching the TV.
Yep.
So I thought, I love that idea. A broadcast and what that means, and then what people do in their home. So when you said the familiar, I think it just really, and I said, and then the song ends and something slower comes on, like let's go to the bar, or we're gonna get a drink, and then we're like, oh yeah, that's my jam. And then you just say, let's get a couple shots and drink them down and get right back on the dance floor. That's the transition for me from a groovy, I did it again, from a groovy broadcast into phantometry, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about this word, phantometry. Is that a new word?
It's a new word. I mean, I like to play with titles in that sense.
Absolutely.
So, telemetry is a way of communication.
Yeah.
I was just combining that word with phantom, so hence phantometry. Basically, after a groovy broadcast, which kind of sets you up for this familiar yet kind of spectral feeling, because in a groovy broadcast, there's the sample of like, you're listening to the Spirit World radio show, like something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
And it was this obscure radio play that I found on YouTube, and like, so I thought that was interesting. And then the transition to phantometry is kind of like, okay, this is where the initial communication happens. This is where it's almost like, that moment where you knock on a wall and you don't know what's on the other side, but then you hear a knock back. That's kind of the moment I was trying to illustrate here. Is like, yeah, it's still familiar, but it's really just kind of reiterating that this is kind of spectral in nature, paranormal, and yeah, it's the other side, tapping back. Essentially.
I put that's the jam, that's the joint, turn that shit up, play it again.
Yeah.
And then I put, that's it right there. Then I put, because I'm listening, right? And I'm like, this part just morphed into like a mirror in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I put, I can't really decipher what I read there, but I said that it's something really loud, but we can still hear something reverberating through the door.
Yep.
So that's interesting what you said, and that's why I wanted you to say, that, and then I was going to my interpretation again to see where the balance is. So let's move on to the next song, which is, and I did it again every time. I'm going backwards. Okay, I'm using a little remote control. Anyway, We Sang You Home, which I had already told you earlier that this one I said is worthy of being placed in a TV show like Euphoria. It just had that like relatability and texture and depth, but also like instantly you could throw some like instantly lyrics will come to mind, I think, for anybody.
Yeah, it's very much like it's funny. It's so I wrote the song, right, and you'll hear my son's voice on sprinkled throughout the whole song. He's doing okay. So the story about that is I wrote the song and I was like, all right, it's good, right, but it needs something else, right, because it didn't really have anything other than the instrumental, which is good, like you said, and it's thought provoking and it's emotion provoking, which I liked about it. And I was like, okay, well, let me just like, let it play. What I like to do sometimes when I'm like, I hit a little bit of a wall or a little bit of, a little bit of a bump, I'll let the song play and I'll just kind of sit there and see what comes to mind. And as I was doing that with this song, I was like scrolling through like, old videos and stuff, not old videos, but just kind of, videos that my, of my son and everything. And my partner Britt posted a video of him meowing like a cat. Oh, no. So because it was his first time he ever started making animal noises. Yeah. So he was doing cat meows, and lo and behold, I shit you not, it was in the key of the song.
Oh my gosh,
that was playing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I was like, obviously, I have to use it now, right? So I real quick like airdropped the video to my Mac. I imported the audio and I cut it up and I edited it to the song, and that's what lends itself to the title "We Sang You Home," because that's also like a book we got him from a museum that he really liked us to read. The title was called "We Sang You Home," and it's this really beautiful book about and it was written by a indigenous American writer and illustrators. Beautiful book. And it's all about, the ending line is, it's all about, bringing life, right? And they're talking about their child. And "We sang you home, thank you for singing back," is the last line of the book. And that line, every time I read it to him, like I get emotional. I'm getting emotional right now thinking about it. And like, so that's what prompted the title. I was like, that's one of his favorite books he likes us to read. It's also one of the most beautiful books I think we have for him. So that's what it is.
So let me tell you, when I started with the title, and I was like, let me just read the title, because I put down it's a really solid track, and it moves well. It moves well. It's solid. There's nothing. I mean, what can you say to that? I think it's just, the more that I listened to it, I was like, damn, this is so solid. But then when I just said, okay, so let's go back to the title, because that's all you have really in terms of how would you decipher that? Mm-hmm. And so I immediately thought of home being what a lot of people refer to as the afterlife, dying. And then I think about people singing when someone dies.
Yes.
And I'm just like, that's how you sing. And I'm like, that's how you bring somebody home. That's how you honor their life, is by singing. And then again, the vibrational energy and the transcendence into the other realm. It was just another play on that. So
yes.
Again, back to the cohesion of the title, of the tracks, of the sounds, of the order of everything, and this it just there's just not that I was looking for any cracks in the mortar, or if I did I wouldn't say them, but I was like, I just want to find a crack in the mortar just to see where, if my interpretation is off. You feel me?
100%.
Like if I'm not really, like, where am I? Is my imagination gone? Is my interpretation gone? Can I think broader? Because people need that. I think people need that in their popular culture needs an overhaul.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think
agree.
this is a good overhaul. And let's move to the next one. Searchlight. Now, Searchlight, I didn't look Searchlight up because I think we know what a Searchlight is.
Yeah.
It's kind of, in a way, I think of Searchlight film production company or distribution or something.
Yeah.
That I've seen, like a motion graphic where it is like a lighthouse with the light moving around. But then I'm like, a Searchlight comes out when people are lost.
Yep.
And we're trying to find something.
Yep.
We're trying to find that which is lost by using light. And then light in itself could be a proverbial light, not just the literal light, but the proverbial light of the universality of knowledge in existence.
Yeah.
Work with that for me.
100%. No, I mean, I dig it, dude. And that's the great thing about this. This is actually a very special track because this one, I had it in like draft form forever. Like it was a track that I started and I loved it. I loved the vibe, but I wasn't sure where to put it, where it was supposed to live. And then once the album was really starting to be fleshed out, I came across it again and in its draft form, and I said, this is another song on the album. I just have to finish it. So I finished it, and I threw more home video samples of my grandma and my granddad and my dad actually on it. My dad's on it as well. And Searchlight is exactly like you said. It's looking for someone who's lost. And the whole interaction that my grandma says, you're going to turn into a ham before you're 6 months old. She's talking to me as a baby.
Yeah.
Because I was a little bit of a ham back in the day. And
a ham.
Someone who likes
guy.
attention,
Yeah.
a funny guy, so I was a little bit of a character as a kid. And then my dad, you can hear my dad going, "What a kid, huh?" And then my granddad goes, "What a kid." So that whole interaction was like kind of like me establishing that I'm looking for my grandma again. And I'm wanting to connect with her.
Yeah. The search.
Yeah, I wanted to confirm that like I am still a ham and I'm still this person that she saw when I was less than 6 months old. I'm just have more, I've just lived longer now.
Got you.
That's kind of the MO behind the title Searchlight.
Well, it's really fitting. It definitely fits. The next one is Numa.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going through my notes like a madman because I did write this one down. I had to look this one up. And so my understanding of Numa is a vital spirit, soul, or creative force of a person.
Yes.
And man, when I heard I was like, oh, a creative force of a person?
Yeah.
Like to think about that aspect of it, because I believe that everybody has potential, but I don't think everybody exercises the potential.
Yep.
And the potential is the creative force, and I never had a word for it. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And tell me how that that idea influenced the track.
So yeah, the idea influenced the track because, well, my grandma was a huge creative influence of mine. She listens to a lot of really eclectic music. She listens to like Irish folk music. She listens to, because she lived in Japan for many years as a kid. She listened to a lot of traditional Japanese folk music. And then she also listens to Trans-Siberian Orchestra all the time.
I'm familiar with them. Yep.
She fucked with them. I remember one of my favorite memories of her is driving past her on the highway, or driving past her on a road and stopping at a traffic light. I didn't know she was next to me at all. She was just there at a red light. And I look over because all I hear is like this Trans-Siberian Orchestra blasting in someone's car. And I was like, who the hell is listening to Trans-Siberian? And I look over, and it's my grandma blasting Trans-Siberian Orchestra as loud as she possibly can, cranking up her stereo system. So I love that moment. So she was a big creative influence of mine, just because of the amount of music she listened to. And she always, whenever I showed her my music, she was always so loving about it, and probably the one of, if not the most supportive of my music endeavors when I was really young. when, back before I was really showing it to anybody other than
Right.
my family,
Right.
she was the one that received it the most warmly. I was always afraid to show it to my dad because my dad's the big musician of the family. Even though he was also super supportive. It's just my grandma was she was so
a different person.
It's a different person.
Different relationship.
So she was my creative pneuma almost. And I know that word because my granddad, her husband, was very much into making sure I had a wide vocabulary when I was a kid. So he would just hammer.
You definitely have a wide vocabulary.
he would just hammer certain words into my brain, like immaculate. I learned that word when I was like maybe 5 years old. He made sure I knew what immaculate meant. Pneuma was one of the words. He made sure I knew what pneuma was. And so anyway, so that's the kind of the whole moment of that coming together.
So this was another case where, I looked up the title, I got a sense of what it means, and then when I listened to it, then I allowed the music to kind of allow the music to like take over my brain, if you will, like take over my thought process. Let me go back. Take over my thought process, and this is what I wrote. I said, so this one is deep. A vital spirit, soul, a creative force of a person. And this is where I was like, wow, this is like more reflective, more reflection of self. And I think dipping your toe into like the elements of your own existential creationism. What are you bringing? Like, what are you going to bring? And what are you bringing? What have you brought? And how does it all manifest into you? So part of that really is, some people are trying to understand the spirit and the soul, and other people try to understand their earthly and terrestrial selves. And then other people are trying to do both at the same time, but trying to find the counterbalance and the interconnectedness between those two elements of the self, and then, this is, to me, where it's the kind of melting. So that all came to me through the song.
Yep.
And I think it's really important with an instrumental, in a way, is to start with the title and then understand kind of the semantics of the word, however you interpret it, but also see where the interplay is between the vibrations of that meaning. It goes into the idea, and you don't even have to have words to be able to be self-reflective, and that's where that one took me places, right?
It's great, man. I'm glad.
So we have spectrograph.
Yes, sir.
Which is, I think that's another word that I did look up. I'm familiar with the electromagnetic spectrum, and first of all, I think it measures. I'm like, okay, let's see. I'm still like student loans. How much am I going to pay by this question? But it's something that is going to measure waves, right? The measurement of waves, and the idea of sound waves and light waves. And just any kind of waves, just being at the root of it is wave, and it is movement, and it's vibrations.
Yep, 100%.
So to me, that's how I interpreted that.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, dude. Basically, I have, a theory when it comes to communicating with, other realms, specifically spirit realm, someone who you've lost. Obviously, science has explored many different ways to communicate with, the dead, spirit worlds, however you want to call it. But very few have actually truly explored the idea of sonic frequency, being able to bridge the gap between existences. And I think that for me is kind of where I like to operate. I really love entertaining the idea of being able to communicate with someone who's passed on to a different plane of existence through sound, right? Because, you listen to something, and you or there's a weird synchronicity where you hear this one word over and over again over the span of 2 weeks, and you don't know, you've barely ever heard the word before, and now all of a sudden everybody's dropping it,
Right.
Weird little things like that happen, where you're just it makes you kind of turn your head a little bit. I feel like a lot of that is rooted in sound. And, I feel like, there are forms of synesthesia. I have frequency synesthesia, and it mixes with color spectrums. So the idea of a spectral graph of like being able to measure communication between you and somebody else, between like the veil, so to speak. So that's kind of how I approached the title of this track, because I wanted it to be like kind of the, play on the idea of like being able to measure communication without actually measuring physical, like voice to voice communication.
I seem to have written extensively on this, and I didn't even know I had written this much, but I also put I said there's this underlying kind of sinister. Mm-hmm. I call it the sinister mood, like a slowly walking through a certain situation, looking around with suspicion. I hear suspicion, and then when that comes in, I feel like that's the opposite of suspicion. It communicates the voice of reason in a way. It's logic. Logic can actually defy suspicion. Logic determines the problem and then says, hey, there's nothing to be suspicious about. I went off in this whole...
That's great. I mean, because it is kind of like, this is kind of where we start dipping our toes slightly in the darker themes of the album. This song is kind of like you said, a little bit sinister to it. It's got this like underlying like tone of like, okay, is this thing I'm communicating with, is this what I think it is, or is it something else? Am I communicating with, like in my specific case, am I communicating with my grandma?
Well, that's what I also said. Again, I said, yeah, there's something about these recordings interspersed throughout that I'm going to ask you about as well.
Yeah.
Which you've alluded to.
Yeah.
Well, so it's very interesting for me because I've never recorded myself taking notes listening to a track. Because I was not able to write it down at the same time, right? I was like, I cannot write this down and listen to it. I'm going to record myself. I tried to take notes. It was just futile.
Yeah.
But I was like, you know what? This is kind of a cool flow if I want to take the time. And I'm really glad I took the time to do it, because I think I would have lost some of this level of detail
it's great, man.
by my own memory. I really
I love it.
Communion. Okay, so... I mean, I don't have a favorite song, but I would say this is one of my favorites for a couple of reasons. One is it's a familiar word for me, and I immediately think of Catholicism and the Eucharist, right? But then I also thought about like this 1989 film with Christopher Walken called Communion, where he's hypnotized. There's a hypnotist. I don't remember the details, but I know that when he was hypnotized, and he had repressed memories of alien contact, alien abduction, and it was like, it's Christopher Walken for like, it was pretty damn convincing.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a movie I gotta watch. Sounds like my kind of movie.
Well, what's interesting too, and I hate to go back to Spectrograph, but I'm gonna do it anyway, damn it, because there is a series, and I can't remember what streaming service is on. It might be Apple TV, but it's a recent one about aliens coming down, right? Mm-hmm. But it is centered around this Japanese woman who is able to communicate and decode the sound waves, and that is being the mechanism for communicating. But it's not just the alien, it's like the way in which the alien communicates by the recreation of memories. Mm-hmm. And so then there's a memory of someone that she was close to who's dead, but like, so then the realm, like putting together the idea of the multi-dimensional reality of existence, and then juxtaposing it against the idea of aliens, and not putting those, I'd never put those two together.
Yeah. No, what I love about what you said about the bringing it back, religious memory, right? Because I was my family was very Episcopalian, right? And communion was a big part of it, right? As it is with a lot of Catholic Christian faiths. I ended up not being an observing Episcopalian, but communion was a big part of my childhood growing up, mm-hmm. right? And like, I think it's the same for a lot of people, but also I'm really glad that you mentioned alien communication, because communion, interestingly, has been used as a word to describe communication between us and things that are not us. So it's very specific like use of the word communication, and it's modified to kind of add like this extraterrestrial, otherworldly sense to it. So because I'm a huge sci-fi nerd, so yeah, that word communion has been used, and I was confused when I was a kid. I was like, why are they saying communion? They're not doing the bread and the wine thing. What are they talking about? So in that Christopher Walken sense, the aliens are communing with.
Well, that's it. That's right there, because then I said, let me break down. I love breaking down words. So we've got communication, we've got union.
Yep.
Well, then we've got commune.
Yep.
So then I think of commune. And then I think of the context of the situation of like when I stumbled upon communion, only knowing, again, when you're young, you probably, at least from my growing up, you only knew like almost like a monolithic perspective of the world, because you didn't have access to the internet. You didn't have access to other people.
Oh yeah.
So when I saw communion, and then I knew there were communes, and then there's aliens, and I was like, oh my God, this is just, it was a lot to be able to. It was almost like being a child and watching The Exorcist. It was just a lot of stuff.
A lot to unpack. Yeah.
It was a lot. Talk about unpacking. Like, there was a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But I don't have an aversion to the word. Like, when I saw it, I just wanted to hear it. And I was like, oh, yeah. Wow. I think I put some... There's times when I didn't really write down the song, but I'm trying to go through, because I think there was something about... There was a distortion or like an overdrive effect that happened.
Yeah.
And so let me see what I have. I have, and I was talking about the way in which sound waves change when they go through a tunnel.
Yep.
Or they're in certain environments. They change, they bend, they distort. And so like, I always thought it was such a good choice, because it elevated the idea of communion, and then me thinking about aliens, and then thinking about sound waves. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It just all came together for that,
Yeah, there's something about, playing with the sonic idea of like playing something back that you just heard, but in a different way, that like is almost like disorienting in a way. And I think that's kind of what I was going for when I played like the reprised instrumental. Like the instrumental stopped, and then in comes this like reprised version of it that's like distorted, it's out of sorts, it's a little bit disorienting. That's kind of what I was going with. I wanted to like play something as like, hey, I've heard that just now, but like it's different now. And I actually do that at a few points throughout the album. And I purchased like this old cassette recorder off of essentially eBay.
Okay.
And then what I did is like, okay, so to add kind of like an analog, cassette tape effects for a lot of these tracks, because obviously there are digital plugins that emulate, cassette tapes just fine.
Sure.
But I wanted it to be a little bit more organic.
Real, yeah.
So I basically played back whatever I wanted to be on the cassette tape through my center speaker. And then I recorded it with the cassette player, and then played it back into itself. So it had this really cool, like, phasey distortion effect that I kind of sprinkled throughout the whole album.
So I wrote, so I don't know, that one was interesting just to hear those, by the way that they've been distorted, almost like they've gone through time. There are memories. They're a blip. They're not nearly as strong as they were when it was really there.
Yep.
And I said, I think that was there to let us move on.
Yep.
But so that all came from it. So the idea of an analog distortion, creating my own memories and perceptions, and like digging into that crate that I hadn't dug into in a little while.
Yeah, man.
But also, I'm a different person now, and it's different time, and it's farther away, and digging in the crate is a little bit different than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I always tell people, it just changes over time. Things don't go away. Like grieving and loss. I say, I've taught classes on death and dying, and I said, grieving and loss, it's not like people always say it's going to be okay. No, it's not going to be okay. Your life is going to be forever changed because of that loss.
Yep.
But we are ever evolving. We are changing, and we are going to be able to adapt to that loss and we're gonna carry it with us, and there's gonna be life gets heavier and heavier because you're carrying it. The idea of longevity, is it really something we want, or is it a curse or a blessing, kind of that idea?
100%. Yeah.
Because of that. So we talked about this song.
Yep.
And so I don't want to go through these. We really got deep into these 3 songs with the vocals. Mm-hmm. And that leaves us with 3 more songs.
Yep.
Was it 3 or 4?
4, I think.
4 songs.
Yep.
4 more songs. And again, here's another one. I say it's Isekai.
Yeah, Isekai.
Okay, Isekai Obscura.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So Isekai Obscura, it sounds like a new brand of like really good sunglasses.
Hey, actually, that's actually good. Yeah, I like that.
So I wrote down the definition of Isekai, but I wrote it down as the transport to new worlds.
Yeah, essentially it is that. So Isekai technically is like a subgenre of Japanese anime or manga.
That was in there too. Yep.
Where it's like a very specific archetype where you have your protagonist, right? Is in one world and then is all of a sudden transported to a new world, and they have no idea any of what's going on in this new world, right? Or it's another interpretation of it is your protagonist or somebody wakes up and doesn't have any recollection of before that moment. Wakes up in a brand new, they're like, what's happening? So that's kind of in a nutshell what Isekai is. It's like a subgenre of Japanese anime and manga. And Obscura is, I want to say it's Latin for darkness. And so it's basically, waking up in a dark world, not understanding the rules of this world, and just kind of being immersed in it. So in the very beginning of this song, you hear the vocal sample, we invite you to learn about this world, right? So that's kind of the vocal sample that plays in the beginning. And it's funny because it's like kind of like a spliced together sample. It's like no one person ever has said that, but like I spliced it in a way where when you rearrange it, it says, we invite you to learn about this world. So that's kind of what I was setting up. It's just like, okay, after the journey that you went through with Asilo Eidolon and Dysfunctional Celestials, the Resonance, now we're in this new world and we're not sure what's happening. It sounds dark, it sounds sinister, it feels dark, it feels sinister, it feels disorienting, it feels like inherently off-putting. So that's kind of the impetus behind the title.
And I think when I looked it up and I got a sense of my interpretation of it, of course, when I see obscure, I think of obscure, ambiguous, unable to really understand. But then I said, well, that's interesting because we've been on the ship, right? And then we touched down these different places and we listened to some people, but now the people are gone and now here we're somewhere else.
Yep, exactly.
So for me, it was like, oh, here, okay, so this makes sense. The transporting, and the portals, and then the mind expansion, and it's almost like the beginning of it, like it kind of prepares you to go farther.
Yep.
To go farther, to go deeper. It's almost like, no, it's not over. This is not over yet. This is, how sometimes you be like, God, I wish it was over. You'd be like, no, because you've gone through it to get to this point. This is the time. 100%. This is the part that you should savor. It's like you've gotten to dessert. Don't just rush through dessert because you're done with it. No, you've gotten through dessert. Now enjoy the dessert. So
100%.
It was, again, going back to the placement of things. Soothsayer. I like the way that it's spelled. I like the idea of future and being a future seer.
Yeah, yeah.
And what that means. You know what? There it is. There's the Obscura. Here's my notes on that too. Let's see if there's anything new there. That's why I've been looking through because I meant to like extract these. Okay, so let's see. I said I said, that's what we're going to move into, kind of love, a sacred love, a soothsayer, right? Who doesn't love a true soothsayer? They always have, like, I wanted to meet a soothsayer who could tell me the future, who could tell me where my life is headed, not a psychic source situation. Plus the way that soothsayer is written over there, it gives it this extra, maybe it's in this world, that's how we spell soothsayer.
Yep.
So that was the idea. I was like, dude, like, okay, don't try to correct it and don't worry about the spelling. You know what I mean? Like that's when I said, okay, in another dimension, there could be slight differences.
Yeah.
And that's again, back to mind expanding, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would you do with the future if it was told to you by a soothsayer?
I mean, I don't know, man. That's a tough one. I don't know if I would want to know.
Yeah.
It's tough. So this one was interesting because this song, for me, the chord progression specifically was probably one of the strangest chord progressions I've come up with in a long time, since understanding and studying music theory. Because when I was first starting out, like a lot of musicians and music producers, I didn't understand a lot about music theory. I just kind of went based off of like what notes and what chords felt good side by side, one after another. And then I learned music theory, and the rules of music theory kind of like started dictating my songwriting almost to a fault. And then I started to realize later on that music theory is kind of like more like, it's more like guidelines, and you can bend these rules to like to really fit what you're going for. And soothsayer, I think, is like one of my first like explorations into that idea. So like it's a very kind of like off-putting, weird, kind of like disorienting type track. It's also in a different time signature than the rest of the tracks on the album, so that's what makes it different initially. And then all the chords are just weird. All the chords they're good together, but they also don't resolve into one another. So there's a lot of tension, back and forth with not a lot of resolution. And I think that's what a soothsayer, if I encountered a soothsayer, that's how I would feel. I would feel very uneasy. I would feel like, I don't know if I want to know this. I don't think we're really meant to truly understand what our future is. I think we're meant to be on this present path, and that's it, right? We're not really necessarily built to truly comprehend what our future holds, right? Especially what our fate holds.
I fully agree. It's we can romanticize it, but I think it would be disastrous.
Yeah, absolutely disaster. Absolutely disaster. I mean, there's a whole reason why Frank Herbert wrote in the entire Dune series, so that there are literal humans in his books that can see the future, and it's like disastrous for like all of humankind for centuries and eons. So so that's basically kind of the whole idea behind that title, is because I'm like, man, this track makes me feel really uneasy. And I think that's a soothsayer.
That's makes sense.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yep.
So I said when I first heard this, and we're talking about Judith Spire, I said there's this, and I'm reading it verbatim. So I said, this is this sadness. This song is sad to me. The song is about grieving the loss of something and still trying to, figure out what is the height of someone's life while they're here. How far did their life go, and why do we not pay attention? That's kind of when I think about when I hear this song. Are we paying attention? Are we celebrating other people while they're here? Are we seeing their spirit, how high they've reached with their existence, and have we seen that? Do we acknowledge that? Do we acknowledge that in ourselves? Do we see ourselves in that way? Are we, it's just a reflective, deeply reflective, emotional song for me. Yeah.
It's obviously a very reflective and emotional song for me too. It's named after my grandma. She went by Judy, but her full name was Judith. And a spire is essentially a tower where someone can watch over you. So that's or watch over something,
Sure.
right? I interpret it as watching over you. Yeah, this song is very much reflective. It's meant to it instilled a lot of questions in my soul. So like I hope, and I'm glad that it begged so many questions from you too, because that's kind of what I want it to be. I want it to be very reflective.
Well, that's interesting though. That I never even thought about like being watched over.
Yeah.
I actually see Aspire as ascending ascending up so far away, and actually moving far away.
Yep.
Disconnecting.
Yeah.
And being gone rather
Right.
than the safety of being watched over.
Yeah. Yeah. So a literal interpretation would be like my grandmother watching over me and my family, etc.
Yeah.
But it is very much an ascension. It's very much like watching over me without necessarily understanding what they're watching over, right? Maybe not having the right perspective. Maybe it's too far away. They can't make out what they're watching over. But yeah, it's very reflective. Very much, thinking about someone you've lost, and did I really appreciate them? Did I really, all these memories that I have of them, trying to recall as much as you can about a person that's been lost, just, so you can help cope with the idea of them no longer being here. That's kind of the idea behind the song. And this is actually the second or third song I wrote for the album. And the whole album almost ended up being a lot like this, where it was very ambient, very lonely sounding. And while I love ambient music,
Right.
I love it so much, clearly from like the way the song is constructed. I wasn't sure if I wanted the whole entire album to feel that way,
Right,
because
got
it's
you.
very overwhelming.
It is.
It was overwhelming for
it
me.
is, it
Like
is.
this song specifically took a lot. So yeah,
I just kept when I first listened to the whole album, I just kept going back to the song, and I said, and this is the reflection that I also had. I said, it's talking about it being reflective and deeply reflective, but I said that's almost like this release, like the transition into just release. An acceptance, the kind of acceptance of the loss. And I said, in the gain of the transformed self, that's what happens after a loss.
Yep.
Because there's a losses and gains, the gain of the transformed self.
Yeah.
I said, this one, I said, I felt like Frank Ocean was about to start singing on this one.
Oh, hey man, that's huge. I love Frank Ocean, man.
Well, the album, oh God, I can't remember the name. A certain point, my memory escapes me, but it was a very kind of ballad type album. It wasn't Channel Orange, it wasn't Blonde, but it was one after like.
I know the one you're.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It starts with an E, I think. But anyway, that like would be such a fit. So the next one, Moon Drinker, was that's like the one that has that drum and bass, right?
Well, no,
Vibe to it? Or is that the next one?
That's
Coalescence?
the Coalescence.
Okay, that's why I skipped ahead. So let's talk about that one while I look at my notes.
Yeah.
Tell me about this
Moon
one.
Drinker was another ambient track. This one,
Okay.
It didn't have very many percussive elements, if any. Funny story about this one, actually, I came across an old recording of me messing around on like this free harpsichord app on my iPad back when iPads were like relatively new to the market, to the technology market. I remember just like thinking, oh my gosh, a harpsichord on a tablet. This is fucking mind blowing. I was just like literally just running my finger, and you could check it. You could like lock the harpsichord strings to like certain keys, major, minor, etc. So I locked it into like a major key, and I was just like strumming like crazy with my finger, just doing these crazy strokes that are probably humanly impossible on a real harpsichord. And I came across that recording just like doing like old like hard drive dives, And I was like, man, there's actually something here. Like, I could do something with this. So I took that recording and I ran it through like multiple instances of convolution reverb and just like trying to fuck it up as much as I could. And what came out was Moondrinker, and I added and then on top of the harpsichord improvisation, I added like some more synth chords on a synthesizer, and I just kind of like it was meant to be like this kind of like a waking up from this like and shaking off like the sadness that was just present in Judith Spire, and kind of like coming to this like new existence.
You know what? And that's the one that I put down for Frank Ocean. That one, I think.
Okay, yeah. That one makes. I mean,
I didn't really. Yeah, so I was like, "Where's Moondrinker?" In my notes. It's interesting when you don't really. I'm just taking a look at my transcription like now because it was so much, but it was just that, and I think it really, for me, it was like, okay, so Judith Spire got me kind of in the feels, and then I think it kind of brought me out of it. Like, it just said, okay, we was there. Now let's move on. Let's okay, we did our thing. Instead like, oh, Moondrinker, let's drink the moon. Let's just move on from this way of being. I think the thing is you shouldn't rush people in when they're having their moment. Let people have their moments. Yeah, they'll get through them. It's I always tell people, like, I can't offer people advice when they're going through heavy things, but I say, in life there's things you just have to sit with. Yep. And you will move through it. But if you try to avoid it and if you're angered by its presence, you're never going to... I'm like, I want to resolve right now. If I have a conflict with somebody, I want to resolve it like right now. I don't want to just... Yeah. And then we can move on. And I think there it is. It's like, you had our moment. Okay, here we're coming back. And then we move in. And that's... What a title for the end of this, because this really is the defining word. This is the defining feature of it, is like it all coalesced in some magical way. That's why it's like, this is magical the way it just ended. And I was like, oh, it's just the whole thing. It's like, you got to listen to this thing from beginning to end to be in full appreciation of it. And it really did. And this is the one with the drum and kind of the drum and bass.
Drum and bass intro. Yeah.
Man, I used to just be I used to listen to drum and bass all the time.
Oh, that's my shit, dude.
I was always driving around, right? I had I was teaching at different campuses. I was always driving around, and I just moved to LA. I didn't know anyone. I would go to Melrose, and there were these little record shops, and I went to this one little record shop called Beat Nonstop, and they would they knew me because I would come there. I didn't know anybody, and I would listen to what came in that week. And that's when I got into the drum and bass and the drum and bass rinse out and Ronnie Size and just on and on and on. And that's all I listened to. And it was like my driving music. And that was like my pace. Yeah. And so when I heard it, it really connected me back. I think I've mellowed out a bit, but I will throw some drum and bass on. Absolutely. It's in the 100%. Rotation.
Yeah, 100%, man.
So but it was a muted drum and bass, though. It wasn't overpowering.
Yeah, it was more like a jungle, a dip into jungle territory. This is obviously a very special track on multiple occasions. I think it's the last track on the album, so it has to be special in some way. Because again, I wanted to show my appreciation for jungle drum and bass and that genre, but also kind of like throw people a curveball, be like, oh wow, okay, drum and bass track, it's happening, and then switch it back to like more like Latin hip hop groove, right? So a coalescence, the impetus behind the title is kind of like the convergence of two worlds, right? Like in trying to communicate with someone or something through the veil or some sort of barrier between realms, like you'll almost kind of like invite in a convergence, a coalescence of the two worlds, right? And the very last like moment of this track, where it's like almost all musical elements are void toward the end, and it's just like rotating sounds, right? And almost like white noise. It's actually, so like throughout the whole album writing process, I was trying to record my son on my cassette recorder that I got. And then he just wouldn't, he was just like, I don't want to do this. So like I recorded him, and I was like right up to his mouth, and you just heard him breathing. And then in digitizing old home videos, there's a video, because my granddad was always the one recording everything on the camcorder, right? He was always the guy like, oh yeah, okay, granddad's recording again, that type of situation. My grandma never touched the camera, but she
was the sound.
Well, she would always be the one interacting.
Okay.
But there was one video where she was on the camcorder, and she was just doing a close up of me as like a, I must have been like 4 months old.
Oh.
This is a close up of me breathing, so you can hear me, because she was so close up with the camcorder, you could hear my breathing. So then I interpolated that footage with the recording of my son breathing, so we were both like coalesced at that moment. The last few seconds of the album, where it was me breathing as a baby and my son breathing, and that was kind of what made me realize that's the title of the album, that's the title of this track, is A Coalescence, and this has to be the last song on the album. Like this song was complete months before the rest of the album was even like close to being complete. Because I thought that was just kind of like a perfect way to end it, was me as a baby, my son as a baby, breathing at the same time on top of one another, both, in analog forms, both with, tapes. So that was kind of the whole thing behind it.
Man, I've been looking at my like my final comments, and I'm trying to summarize.
Yeah, it's a lot, man.
It's not possible to summarize this, but it is possible. I do have some things I think that I have to say, because they were so authentic, because I wrote them, right? I put I said, I think each of these songs, there could be a significant dialogue on each one, from how it sounds to its waveform, how it waveform looks, to just the basic structure of how it builds, and then it resonates. Then it starts to wither away and quietly, graciously return to the silence of space, the silence of life off the planet. It's pretty damn silent out there. This is a noisy place, but let's enjoy it while we're here. And if we have moments where we can enjoy it, well, let's take those too. I would say, or we can enjoy it. Let's say that's, I would say that's like part of the deal. Thank you for sharing this album with me, and really, 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 really impressed, and hope that it reaches so many other people, and it was a cathartic experience for you. And I said definitely, I'm sure it was, and more songs to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, it was a lot writing this album, but I'm so glad that it turned out the way it did. And I mean, just hearing your thoughts on it, it's just, I'm over the moon about it, man. This has been incredible, and I'm very excited for people to hear it. It comes out October 20th.
October 20th?
Yes.
All platforms?
Yep. And man, I mean, and also shout outs to my buddy Kevin Fassick. He did the album artwork.
I love the album artwork, man.
It's so funny, man.
Let me bring that up again, because I love that part of it too, because I was like, oh, look at that, it's so fitting.
Yeah, man, it's so funny, man. It's the same thing. Like I've known him for years. Actually, he was one of the first people to truly tell me, like, he was one of the first people who I shared my music with, who like looked at me dead in the eyes and was like, dude, you need to do this, like, for like, just do it all the time, like, make as much of this, because this is great.
Yes,
so
I agree.
he's a huge reason why I'm doing this to this day, and I'm working with audio professionally. So I thank him for that. But I know I've known him for years, and I knew he was a really talented artist. And he did like an album mock-up artwork for me years ago, and unfortunately the album never saw the light of day. You know, but I was like, man, that artwork was so good. And so I hit him up once this album was close to me finished. I was like, dude, you're the guy. Like, I need you to do my album artwork. Like, I don't care how much it costs. I don't care how long it takes you. Do what you got to do, man. Let's do it. And same thing. Gave him very, very broad guidelines. Gave him the idea. Gave him the early masters of the album. He listened to it. And then he did this masterful collage of the artwork. And so he basically took, as I understand it, he went to thrift stores all around and just took like old sci-fi books and comics and novels, and he just like piled them all up and took all the interesting bits and cut it all out, and then like laid it out. And then when he showed me the final product, he's like, boom, what do you think? I'm like, it's fucking magic, dude. Like, that's it. That's the artwork. And it was incredible, man.
That is incredible.
He knocked it out of the park, dude. I'm really, really grateful for him. Yeah, and I'm super happy about this. This is the first album I've officially released since 2017. I'm very, very excited about it. Yeah.
I call it a post-COVID album.
Yeah, honestly, I had a during COVID album, and it was I haven't officially released it. I might release some of the songs someday.
Right.
But it was just a very angry album, and I was like, I don't know if because I sat on it for so long. That it's like no longer a part of me.
Sure, I got you.
And like I'm just like, it's there, and there's some good songs on it that like, you know, but it's like this very much speaks more to me today. Is this Lightships album, because it's about family, it's about love, it's about loss, it's about pain, but it's also about reaching out and communicating and understanding that you need to feel this, and you need to be there, and you need to absorb it in order to move past this current like stage of what you're feeling.
Yes.
So yeah, no, I'm very excited, man.
Yeah.
Very.
Well, man, can you believe we have been chopping it up? Everybody, Jeremy, Bar, Lunartick, Lightships. What's more to say, right? Thanks a lot, man.
Dude, thank you.
What a great experience has been for me, and every time I hear it, I'll remember this, and I can't wait for you to share this with the world, man.
I appreciate you, brother.
And we're in the same place right now. There goes the illusion. There goes the illusion. We are signing off. It's late.
Peace. Love
Everybody,
y'all.
good night.